Greetings, my friends. Sit ye down, and hear tales of the past, told by the ancient flame. There are many tellings of these stories, and this one's mine. The Humiliation of Thor. Far from the shining towers of Asgard, beneath skies dark with stormlight, the chariot of Thor rolled across the world. Its wheels spat fire, and the twin goats that drew it galloped over hill and cloud alike. Beside him rode Loki, sharp-eyed and smirking, as ever half a companion and half a curse. Whilst Thor felt a certain level of contempt for his blood brother, his sly tongue and quick wit was occasionally useful. Night came swiftly upon them, and the thunder god, weary of the wind, sought shelter. In a lonely valley stood a farmer's hall, humble but warm. The man and his family, seeing the two travellers descend from the storm, welcomed them with trembling awe, for the power of Thor was written in the gleam of his eyes and the weight of the hammer he bore. "Let us share our fire and bread," said the farmer. "And I," said Thor, "shall share my meat, for my goats are more than they seem." With that, Thor gave thanks to Odin and slew the beasts and set them to roast on the fire. The smell of the feast filled the hall, rich and wild, and Loki's laughter mingled with the cackle of the fire. When they had eaten their fill, Thor laid the empty goat hides on the ground and spoke to the family. "Lay every bone upon the skins as you found them. Leave none broken or lost, for I shall bless them come the morning." The farmer bowed. His son Thiafi and daughter Roskva gathered the bones in reverence. But hunger and curiosity are strong companions of youth. When no one was watching, Thiafi cracked one of the leg bones and sucked out the sweet bone marrow before setting it amongst the rest. Loki saw this and smiled, saying nothing. When dawn returned, Thor raised Mjolnir above the hide and spoke a great word of power. The skins quivered, the bones clattered, and in a flash of thunder, the goats stood whole and alive once more, stamping and shaking their manes. But on the way out to the carriage to rehitch them, one of the goats was limping badly, its hind leg twisted and weak. Thor's eyes darkened. He turned to the farmer's family, and in his wrath filled the hall like a rising storm. "Who has done this?" he roared. The man and his wife fell to their knees, white with terror, and the children clung to each other speechless. At last Thiafi confessed his misdeed. Thor's hand tightened on his hammer, and lightning flashed through the rafters. "I should strike you down where you stand," he thundered. But the farmer cried, "Lords of storms, spare my children. Take them instead as your servants whilst the goats recover, to walk in your shadow and bear your burdens." "A youngster's mistake," he mused. He nodded, lowering the hammer. "So be it, until at which point the goats are restored to their full health. The boy and the girl shall follow me." And so they left the goats behind for the farmer to take care of, whilst Thor, Loki, and the two children set forth on foot. Their road led towards the far Northland, into Jotunheim, realm of the giants, where thunder meets frost and the world itself seems to groan under ancient weight. They crossed wild forests and seas whipped by wind, until at last the day faded, and in a great forest the party found themselves before a strange hall, vast beyond imagining. The entrance gaped wide, but there was no door. Inside there were 4 huge rooms straight ahead, and a slightly smaller 5th one off to one side, but again, no doors. "A strange place," murmured Loki, "but my feet are weary." They entered, taking a room each, and lay down for the night. Sleep quickly overtook them, but near midnight, the ground began to tremble, and the hall quaked with a roar like worlds colliding. "An earthquake!" cried Roskva. Thor leapt to his feet, seizing his hammer, but as quickly as it had started, the rumbling stopped. The party exchanged looks, but returned to sleep. Not an hour later, the noise returned, and the ground trembled once more. They all fled outside, but again, the noise had already stopped. Thor, whose temper was not quelled for lack of sleep, climbed a tree to try and get a better look, to see what was going on. He looked down, sweeping the valley from left to right, but there, lying right at the bottom of the valley, was perhaps the biggest giant he had ever seen, whose snores were shaking the trees and sending stones tumbling from the hills. When he returned, Loki remarked, "Here's one worth smiting more than the rest. Strike him down, and be done so we may get some rest." Thor did not make a habit of doing what Loki suggested, but he was a big fan of smiting giants and of sleep. And so he lifted his hammer high, but before he could strike, the giant stirred, yawned, and opened one eye. "Peace, little one," he rumbled. "Do you mean to murder a sleeper?" Thor's jaw tightened. "Name yourself, Jotun, before I end your dreams forever." "I am Skrymir," said the giant, sitting up. His voice was as deep as an avalanche. "And I know who you are, son of Odin. The red beard, the hammer. You hardly make it difficult. You seek the stronghold of Utgard, do you not? Then I shall walk beside you. The road is long and treacherous, even for gods." Thor frowned, but said nothing. He was seeking no such stronghold, but a castle full of giants would pose a good fight. Skrymir took up his glove, and Thor saw with a start that it was the hall that they had slept in. Skrymir emptied out all of their possessions and provisions that the party had kept in there into a great sack bound with cords as thick as a well-built man. He volunteered to carry everything, and without waiting for an answer, the giant walked off at a lazy pace. Well, a lazy pace for the giant. The rest of them had to run to keep up. The giant did not stop once all day, and by the time the sky darkened once more, the party was completely exhausted. Skrymir said he wasn't hungry, tossed the provisions bag to Thor, and lay down beneath a tree, beginning to snore so loudly that the stars themselves trembled once more. Thor, tired, hungry, and short of temper, tried to open the sack of food. But no matter how hard he tugged, the knot would not yield. He pulled and he heaved, but it would not budge. His fury rose like thunder, and in his frustration he tossed Mjolnir at the sleeping giant. The hammer struck the giant's brow with a mighty blow, much to Thor's delight. But Skrymir barely murmured to himself, "Damn leaves, can't get a decent rest anywhere." Confused, Thor walked up to the sleeping giant, and with all the force he could muster, brought his hammer crashing down on the sleeping giant's head. Again, the sleeping giant barely seemed to notice, simply muttering something about acorns. Thor's teeth ground together, though he could think of nothing else to try. The party gave up and tried to get some sleep. However, between the rumblings of their own stomachs and the giant's cataclysmic snoring, that was simply impossible. Near dawn, Thor had had enough, and decided to try for a third time. A mighty blow this time, enough to crack a mountain. He climbed a tree, and in two hands brought Mjolnir crashing down on the giant's temple. The hammer struck true, and Skrymir sat up with a start. What bird has fouled me with its mess? He roared into the forest. Skrymir looked at the sky. It's nearly morning anywhere, I suppose, he said, trying to wipe something off his forehead. He rose, stretched, and grinned. We part here, Odin's son, he said. You will find Utgard not far ahead. But take my counsel, Thor of Asgard. Do not boast too loudly when you come amongst the giants. Without waiting for a response, he strode away, leaving the 4 travellers to stare after him, wearied and wondering. By midday, they did reach the hall of Utgard, fortress of the frost giants. The walls rose so high they pierced the clouds, and the gate itself was bound with iron thicker than trees. Yet between the bars was space enough for travellers of these size to slip through like children through a fence. Within stood a vast hall, filled with giants eating and drinking beneath firelight that danced red upon their stony faces. At the high seat sat Utgard Loki, lord of this realm, tall, cold-eyed, and smiling as they approached. Not to be confused with our own Loki, of course. Welcome, tiny ones, he said. It is rare for such small creatures to wander so far from home. Tell me, here in my hall, do you think yourself mighty? Loki's pride burned at the mockery, and before Thor could even open his mouth, he interjected. I can eat faster than any in your hall, said he. Let it be tried, said the giant king. A trough of meat was laid before Loki, and one giant volunteer, Logi, was set to be Loki's opponent. At the signal from the king, both began to feast. Loki ate and ate and ate, scoffing whole handfuls of meat and pies, leaving the bones and gristle as he went. He met Logi in the middle of the trough, but whilst Loki had devoured the food, Logi had eaten not only the flesh, but the bones and the gristle and the very trough itself. Laughter shook the hall, and Loki seethed. But at least he wasn't hungry anymore. Next, the young boy Thjalfi stepped forward. Let one of you race me. I am the fastest runner in the parts I come from. Hugi stepped forward as volunteer, a youth, lean but silent. The king declared that 3 races would be run, one chosen by each participant, and the final by himself. Thjalfi suggested 3 laps of the great courtyard. At a word from the king, they were off. But Hugi reached the end before Thjalfi was even halfway. Even Loki fell silent at that, for Thjalfi ran like the wind. The second race, Hugi suggested, should be up and down the tallest tower of the castle. Again, the king signalled for both of them to start, but by the time Thjalfi placed his foot on the 9th step going up, Hugi passed him coming down again. The final race, as chosen by the king, was a short dash, the length of the great hall. Thjalfi had hardly lifted his foot to start when, in a flash, Hugi had crossed the line at the other end. Then Thor rose, his eyes dark with humiliation. Enough of games. Bring me a horn, and I will show you how the gods of Asgard drink. The king signalled, and the giants brought forth a great horn as long as a man's body. Drink it dry in a single draught, he said, and you will be called mighty by the giants. 2 is acceptable, but any in this hall can do it in 3. Thor lifted the mighty horn and drank, long and deep. But when he paused for breath, the level had hardly fallen. He tried again until his breath failed and sweat stood upon his brow. Yet the horn was not changed. A third time he raised the horn and drank until he thought he would burst. When he lowered it, the level may have dropped a little, but only a little. Mocking smiles spread throughout the hall, and Thor threw the horn into a corner. "Perhaps strength is more your gift," mocked the king. "There is a game played by children in my hall. Try seeing if you can lift my cat from the floor." Now a giant's cat is no smaller than a horse, but should still have posed no issue to Thor. He bent and grasped around the waist of the grey creature, but as he strained, its body simply arched like a great bow. For a second try, Thor ducked underneath the creature and stood up with it on its back, but he only managed to raise one paw clear of the ground. Rage blazed in his heart. "I am not here to fight with cats," Thor shouted at the assembly. "Let me wrestle any of you, one-on-one," he thundered. "Who will take me?" Utgard-Loki laughed and called forth an old woman, bent and grey. "This is Ellie, my servant. If you can master her, we will praise your might." Ellie seemed to be deaf too, as the king had to shout instructions at her. Thor begrudgingly accepted the challenger, for he had said he would wrestle anyone. They grappled, and at first it seemed he would win. But as they struggled, the old woman's strength grew. Slowly, inexorably, Thor's knees bent. He tried, he strained, using every trick he knew and every ounce of strength he had left. But at last, one knee touched the floor, and Utgard-Loki called, "Enough!" Thor collapsed, feeling weak and defeated. The king raised his hands. "No more contests. You have fought well. Stay the night, and at dawn go your way." When morning came, Thor and his companions prepared to leave. Outside the gates, the giant king followed and spoke softly. "Now that you are beyond my walls, Odin's son, I will tell you the truth of what you have seen. Ever since you have been near my fortress, I have been well aware of you. I may be the giant's king, but I am also their mightiest conjurer. The giant you met in the forest? That was me also, in magical disguise. The bag whose knots you could not loose? Well, the cords themselves were wrought with bands of iron. The blows you struck at Skrymir? Well, see for yourself." Utgard-Loki raised Thor so he could see a chain of mountains in the distance, marked with 3 great valleys, each bigger than the last. "Your blows fell on these mountains, not upon him. And the valleys you see nearby are the marks of your hammer. Loki feasted well, though his foe, Logi, was fire itself, which consumes all things. Thiafi raced against Hugi, thought, which no one can outrun. The horn you drank from was filled by the mighty ocean itself. The tide in some places of Midgard has dropped by 30 feet. The cat you lifted was Hormunganda, the Midgard serpent, and there was not a giant in the hall whose heart was not pounding. We were worried you were going to free its tail from its mouth and destroy the world. And when you raised its paw, part of it emerged from the sea. You are that strong, Odin's son. And the old woman, Ellie? She was age and time itself. And no one, not even you, can wrestle time forever. And that being said, I have never seen a being stand against her for so long. It was truly a sight to behold." Thor's face darkened like a gathering storm. Then you have tricked us and mocked us, giant. I should shatter your hall for your deceit. He turned, raised Mjolnir, but where the castle had stood was only the empty plain and the whispering wind. The giants and their hall were gone. And Thor the Thunderer stood silent, his rage fading into the long echo of the storm. And that is the story of how Thor was humiliated by the king of the giants. Some say he learnt and grew from this experience, while others say it still haunts his nightmares. And for now, my friends, I grow weary and bid you good night.